After reading All New Wolverine Volume 2, I feel split down the middle with this particular trade. In some ways it's a character-focused story like its previous volume, but in other ways it feels like the volume is in a bit of a holding pattern before they can go back to their main plotline. I'll do my best to keep my reasons as concise as possible, but before I delve into them, there are a few caveats that I need to address so everyone understands where my opinions are coming from. Also, a quick warning. This is a review for Volume 2 in an ongoing series of reviews, meaning I will do my best to keep Volume 2 as spoiler-free as possible. The same once again, though, cannot be said for Volume 1, so if you keep listening from here, I'm going to presume you're either okay with spoilers for Volume 1 or you've already read it. With that out of the way, let's discuss event comics and event tie-ins in particular for a moment. Truth be told, I'm not a big fan of event comics. Generally speaking, I'm much more interested in self-contained, character-driven superhero stories that build over a period of time and climax with as little outside interference as possible. Event comics are more often than not the opposite of that, emphasizing large-scale conflicts, a wide cast of characters, bringing numerous titles into the fray, and being more plot-driven by nature. Now, it's not impossible to tell exciting and unique stories within that format, and I have enjoyed some events in the past. I'm just not as drawn to that form of storytelling. As a result of these large-scale events, there's usually too much story for one creative team to cover within the number of issues they have planned out. That's where the event tie-ins come into play. Tie-ins serve as a way to add more depth to the main narrative through the use of side stories. Whether it's as simple as looking at the same moments from another character's perspective, fleshing out the backgrounds or motivations of the key players in the story, or even dealing with completely different stories set within the same backdrop of the larger event. Tie-ins come in many different forms depending on the event it spins out from. The quality of these tie-ins tend to vary, though. Some writers, like Peter David, are able to incorporate the event into their long-term planning for the book they're working on, and that's great when it works out that way. Unfortunately, it doesn't always turn out like that, though. For better or worse, tie-ins have developed a reputation over the years for halting or outright damaging the momentum creators have built up with their own titles. Let's make something crystal clear, though. I'm not bringing this up to point fingers at anyone specifically. I'm only using this as a way to explain my perspective on event tie-ins. If it were up to me, I'd prefer if tie-ins were made as seldom as possible. And with that in mind, I hope now that all my cards are out on the table, you will understand where I'm coming from with the points I'm going to make regarding Volume 2. And now back to All New Wolverine Volume 2. This volume is broken up into two halves primarily. The first with 3 short stories acting as a soft setup for the Civil War II tie-ins, with a guest star issue with Squirrel Girl and a 2-part Fin Fang Foom story, which has guest stars Captain Marvel and Iron Man. The second half features the Civil War tie-ins themselves, which spotlight a conflict between Laura, Gabby, Steve Rogers, Captain America, and Old Man Logan. For the record, this is an event that I haven't read as of this recording, and I decided to stick with that only because I want to take the perspective of a reader who, for one reason or another, decided to only pick up All New Wolverine and could not or chose not to read the event. The reason why I'm so split on this volume, ironically, isn't even due to the tie-ins themselves, more so regarding the book's structure and tone. Contrary to the rapid-fire progression of Volume 1, the second volume is noticeably decompressed. The pre-Civil War issues are the most at fault here, placing the characters in entertaining situations but ultimately being a bit lean when it comes to the plot progression and standout character moments. The Civil War II tie-ins, on the other hand, are loaded with plenty of compelling character moments, action, and teases for what's to come. I can see Taylor being between a rock and a hard place in regards to this volume. Do you progress your main plot forward for 3 issues before melding your remaining chapters to function as your event tie-in? Or do you pause your main plot and build to the event tie-ins so that they can feel more cohesive? There's no right or wrong approach to this, each have their own pros and cons. And for what it's worth, his tie-in issues did a good job of giving me the essentials of the event and focusing in on a character-driven story within that landscape. So rest assured you can easily read this volume without having to purchase Civil War II, if that's what you'd prefer. I honestly wasn't expecting to have that experience going into this book, so it was certainly a pleasant surprise for me that turned out to actually be my favorite section of the book. The tone is a bit trickier to unpack. 2 volumes into this series, we can tell that this isn't attempting to craft a dark and brooding story for Laura. It's looking more to balance the light and dark aspects of the character, and that's perfectly fine with me. Marjorie Liu's excellent run on X-23 also balanced high-octane action and out-there concepts with an emotional journey for Laura, and that balance has been one of my favorite aspects with Taylor's run as well. Volume 2, however, struggles to find that balance for the majority of the trade, arguably not finding its groove fully until the second last issue. The poignant characterizations happen with less frequency here, and with a greater emphasis on bombastic action and humor, particularly when it comes to the pre-Civil War II issues. That's not to say the Squirrel Girl team-up issue wasn't entertaining, because I'd be lying if I said that. I had some nice chuckles with it, and a bizarre team-up on occasion can be a great idea. What made that wacky concept work as well as it did, though, were some stellar emotional moments, with Laura further stepping into her role as a pseudo-sister figure for Gabby. Without these moments peppered in, the action loses some of its weight, and even the humor doesn't land quite as well in later issues, though there is another cause for that. The standout emotional moments for me in this volume include another beautifully written Laura and Logan flashback during her beginnings at the X-Mansion, a scene later on in that same issue with Laura and Gabby that reflects that flashback as a full circle moment for Laura, and the discussion between Laura and Old Man Logan at the end of the Civil War II tie-ins. Oddly enough, I really dig the decision to incorporate Old Man Logan into this volume, and while it took a while for the two to have a significant interaction, when it did happen, it was well worth the wait. I'm not usually a fan of the alternate universe version of the characters, but like the integration of the clones in Volume 1, the alternate universe angle brings about some great storytelling potential with Laura, having to interact with a person who looks and acts like her father, but isn't. What's unfortunate is that the moments I mentioned primarily take place near the beginning and end of the trade, leaving me largely disconnected from the middle portion of the volume. Issues 8 and 9 in particular mark the point where I had the most difficulty investing myself in what was going on. The art was solid, and there was plenty of action and jokes for people to have a good time, but the lack of the emotional core was evident to me there, and it reflected in my reading experience. What once again doesn't help with that is the fact that this volume is filled with a bunch of guest stars. I can understand the need for guest stars with the Civil War II tie-ins, and I did just praise Taylor for bringing Old Man Logan into the fray. But it would have been nice if the 3 issues prior to those tie-ins could have exercised a bit more restraint. To call back to my point from Volume 1's review, we could have used some of that panel space to better flesh out the Laura and Gabby pseudo-sister dynamic, since that's what the book is wanting me to take away from the two's interactions in the volume. And I see it in there, but there's just not enough interaction with the two just yet for me to latch onto it. I wouldn't necessarily even be opposed to seeing guest stars like Iron Man or Captain Marvel showing up in the book from time to time. It's unfortunately becoming too frequent for my taste, though, and the core characters of Laura and Gabby are strong enough to where they don't need a guest star every issue to tell a compelling story. As it stands, though, Iron Man and Captain Marvel didn't gel into the 2-part Fing Fang Foom story near as well as Captain America and Old Man Logan did into the Civil War II tie-ins. Captain America and Old Man Logan had distinct purpose for being in the tie-ins, whereas Iron Man and Captain Marvel felt unnecessary for their story. Also, as a side note, I wouldn't mind seeing Tom Taylor as the follow-up writer to Captain America after Mark Waid's time on the book is up. He has a solid voice for the character in the tie-ins, and I could see him bringing a fresh voice to that character. When it comes to the art for Volume 2, I was initially concerned that the original art team of David Lopez and David Navarro were not returning. Their contributions to Volume 1 were so instrumental to that book's success with their fluid action and strong storytelling sensibilities that I would have loved for them to have been the long-term artists for the series. Fortunately, the artists who followed them up were able to put my fears to rest with their considerable talents. Marcio Takara handles the pre-Civil War II issues, and is arguably the strongest artist aesthetically. His characters just pop out from the page, and it's a nice book to look at while he's illustrating it. Though the coloring on his issues is a bit interesting, in the sense that the first 2 issues feel a bit too glossy for me, and then on his last issue, a different colors comes onto the book and tones that down, which is a good thing. It makes it feel a bit more down-to-earth, and that arguably is the best-looking issue of the bunch. Unfortunately, Takara doesn't get a ton of action or character beats to work with, but he does a commendable job with bringing his pages to life. The Civil War II tie-in issues are illustrated by I.G. Guara, and while his style doesn't pop as much as Takara's, Guara more than earns my respect as a workhorse when it comes to his storytelling. There's a lot going on in the second half when it comes to action, humor, and strong dynamics between the characters. Guara absolutely sticks the landing with his execution. His pages have me gripped from beginning to end, and I really hope he gets a chance to be the new series artist going forward. I feel like he's earned that chance with the quality of his work. You might have noticed that I haven't brought up Gabby much in this review, and there's a reason for that. Gabby is a bit odd in this volume. I enjoyed her in Volume 1 for her innocence and the dynamic she had with her clone siblings and Laura, but now that it's just down to Laura and Gabby, something wasn't quite clicking here with her. This could come down to any number of things. It could be that she's used as the bulk of the book's humor and not all the humor landed for me personally. Perhaps it's the lack of emotional beats in the first half of the volume. Or it could be simply that kid characters are tough to write in fiction and not to make them irritable. It's a difficult balance. Personally, I found this to be a combination of the three for me. But I still see potential with this character. Once the Civil War II tie-ins came into play, there was a bit more of a balance between action, humor, and the drama, which benefit the character much more. And the implication dropped with her at the end of this volume certainly left me intrigued to see where she goes from here. Another odd question I have for this volume, which is in the same vein as the why Laura doesn't kill question I brought up in volume 1, is that there's this moment with Old Man Logan and Laura, and Old Man Logan's rummaging in her apartment fridge for beer, and Laura asks him how old that he thinks she is. And that's a very good question, comic. How old is Laura at this point in the Marvel Universe? When she first appeared in the comics, she was around the 13 to 15 age range, give or take, and she's clearly gotten to where it seems like she's borderline freshman college age, judging from the fact that, she's living in her own apartment, and also she is drawn about that age. And I'm not normally one of those people who needs to know exactly how old a character is, but since you brought it up, I would like to know. You kind of have me curious. Perhaps this is one of those cases like Laura's reasons for not killing, where it's already been established in other books, and they don't feel the need to bring it up again. But I would argue that both of those questions would be essential information to include for this ongoing series, especially for new readers who haven't tracked down those books yet. Quick note on the paper quality. It's essentially the same as Volume 1's, which is fine, I guess. It could be better. It just unfortunately looks very small in comparison to like other books that have a similar page count. Even if they have the exact number of pages, something about those volumes just feel like you're not getting much content there. The paper quality isn't necessarily fantastic either, and unfortunately you just gotta be careful with it because you could end up bending it or damaging it pretty easily. But it's okay, I guess. So, I already mentioned that stuff in Volume 1, so just same thing basically applies for Volume 2. All New Wolverine Volume 2 suffers a bit from the sophomore slump. Unable to both move the series plot forward and set up for the Civil War II tie-ins in a satisfying manner, as well as balancing its humor, action, and poignant character moments. Ironically enough, it wasn't until the Civil War II tie-ins kicked in that the volume regained its sense of balance, with a compelling conflict, better emphasis on character dynamics over action and guest stars, and an interesting tease for what's to come in the future. There's still fun to be had with this trade, but it feels just a bit too aimless for its own good. All New Wolverine Volume 2 retails for $19.99 for 6 issues of content, and keeping everything that I just said in mind, I'd say Volume 2 is still worth checking out, but at a discounted price, ideally around the $9 to $10 mark. There were unfortunately too many things holding this volume back for me to give it any higher of a recommendation. Fingers crossed that Volume 3 can regain its footing and deliver a more focused narrative and tone, with minimal guest stars and a renewed emphasis on the strong character moments that Taylor excels at. Thank you as always for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this one was a little bit more critical, but that's going to happen on occasion. Just gotta try and keep it as fair as I can. Feel free to like this video if you enjoyed it, share it with your friends, subscribe if you want to watch some more comics content and video games content. And feel free to join me again in 2 weeks with my next comic review. This one's going to be pretty different and maybe not something I'm going to do a lot of, but figured this one would be kind of a nice little fun thing. It's going to be a crossover comic from Marvel and DC. It's going to be Daredevil and Batman, Eye for an Eye. Hope to see you then.